Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. I was honored yesterday to be a speaker in Stanford's Distinguished Speaker Series, or at least one of their Distinguished Speaker Series. I was there to offer advice to parents of Stanford students. And I thought I would share with you some of the content. Uh, it's aimed, I think, primarily at parents of kids who are at highly selective colleges, but it probably could be more broadly applicable. Anyway, here we go. So, first of all, how much should parents help? Well, it depends on the kid, how much the kid needs, how much help the kid is willing to tolerate, how good you are at communicating, that is, not just speaking, but listening well. That said, the American societal norm is after high school to let the kid fly or crash pretty much on their own. But my view is that on average, more parental involvement is wise. After all, these kids, their brains are not fully formed till 25, but you really should start with a conversation that's something like this. Of course, Janie, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and it is right that now you have more autonomy as you're in college. But for what it's worth, you're only 19 or 18, whatever. And my having been on this earth a little longer than you have, I think I might still have a little something to offer you. So I'd like to continue being an advisor. I mean, you're the godfather, now the godmother, whatever. But I would welcome remaining a consigliere. What do you think? And then, I like those words, what do you think? It's a great way to end almost any time you're giving some suggestion. Anyway, then listen thoughtfully to your child's response. And yes, then adjust the extent of your involvement accordingly. Well, how might you, as a parent, be helpful? The first area you could be helpful in is in choosing a major and a career. And I've got a little bit of an unconventional view here. My view is that it's wise to tentatively choose a career and major early, after only a modest amount of exploration. For example, now I'll specifically use, say, Stanford, but it obviously applies to whatever college your kid's at. Peruse stanford.edu's list of majors, and then click through to any majors that are of interest. Examine the required and elective courses and the descriptions of the careers that major might lead to. That simple little brief task enables kids to consider a lot more than the usual, I'm a word person, so I'm going to be a writer, I like to argue, so I'll be a lawyer, I'm a science person, I'll be a medical researcher or a doctor. That enables you to quite quickly, but with a fair degree of thoroughness, consider a large number of majors. With regard to choosing a career, a parallel process. I have a categorized list of 340 careers and self-employment ideas in my new book, Careers for Dummies. And then your kid should read, and maybe with you, maybe by themselves, read any of the profiles that are of careers that are of interest. And you might particularly call your kids' attention to under-the-radar careers. I focus on a lot of those in that book, Careers for Dummies. Here's just a few that a Stanford-level student who isn't a techie might consider. Program evaluator. So much funding these days goes as a result of getting grants, but those grants say that the program has to be evaluated. Or a grant writer. That's the converse to that. Or political campaign manager. Those are not the things the careers that people tend to think of, so there's less competition. If your kid is more technical, they might consider some under-the-radar careers like forensic accounting. That's like, how do you follow the money from the drug laundering money, for example, or employees stealing from the company. Or technologically oriented kid might want to aspire to researching the biological basis of reasoning, which of course is foundational to almost all accomplishment. Being an orthodontist, but not just, an orthodontist in some sense is just a technician, but with a research component to their career, for example, trying to develop a way to accelerate the alignment of teeth, get them to move more quickly. Or developing better apps to improve your memory, or reduce anxiety, or improve the quality of matches on dating websites. We all know that the matching paradigms aren't exactly perfect, or they're far from it. Another way a parent can be involved in helping their child choose a major and career is letting them know, and this again, I'm trying to focus on the things here that are not standard advice, because if it's obvious and you've heard it a million times before, I'm not adding any value. I believe that early specialization is underrated. If you're remaining a generalist, it's comforting, but often it's worth committing to becoming world class in one narrow area. And again, that's kind of a Stanford level advice, because to be really honest, your average student isn't going to become world class. But the kind of kid who goes to Stanford has that shot. Not only specializing early could make you in great demand, you gain confidence from knowing that narrow area cold. If you tire of it, it's then often easier to branch out and be successful in a new niche because you've developed a world-class reputation in your first niche. For example, if your kid's a physics or a chemistry major and may decide to be a world-class expert in splatter, blood splatter, accident debris splatter, but gets bored with it, your kid can invoke their world-class expertise to move to some other example of fluid mechanics, for example, in rocketry or in biomedical blood flow, whether it be drugs or devices or instruments or analytics. Another way a parent can be helpful to their career, and by the way, what I'm doing here is trying to empower you with some tips that I use as a career counselor so that you bring something to the table when you're helping your kid with their career choice. It's underrated. Google search is so underrated because it's free, but it's current, and they so well curate the articles, enabling you to search so much of the world's knowledge. So really encourage your kid to Google search a prospective career, like field seismology careers, and then check out the top result articles and YouTube videos. That tends to be easier and more valuable than trying to get an informational interview, where you ask one of your friends or somebody to talk to your kid. Even if you can get one of those, that's merely one person's perspective. You can get such a broader, more representative perspective through that Google search. Beyond that quite modest level of career exploration, which can be done very quickly, additional exploration rarely yields sufficient additional valid clarity to justify deferring the choice of major and tentative career. Of course, your child could end up changing major, changing career, but even so, that change to whatever they do next is usually going to be a more informed choice than if they simply continue to dabble around. It's kind of like the sailor who'd like to get from San Francisco to Hawaii. Yeah, you should be doing some reasonable planning, but after that, it's wise to set sail and adjust based on the winds. You might also help your kid decide whether to start a business. Business startups, they make a lot of headlines, but the actual number of startups are in decline. And last week on my radio show, I interviewed the famed Cisco CEO John Chambers, and he said that the fewer businesses are getting started because of the very high regulatory costs, and there's very little teaching of entrepreneurship in our schools and colleges. But that said, Stanford students, because of their ability, their tech centricity, and Stanford's location in Silicon Valley, are more likely than most students to beat the odds of self-employment. And even if their first business fails, the lessons they learn may be as potent as those that they would have learned in business courses, or did learn in business courses. And self-employment may be an increasingly attractive alternative to being hired by companies or nonprofits because they continue to tighten their belts, hiring fewer people full-time at good salaries with good benefits and job security, and instead hiring people for gigs. Another way to improve the odds of self-employment success is to start an under-the-radar, low-status business. When you do that, you're ensuring weaker competition. There's very few people who graduate from a Stanford or Harvard or a Berkeley who want to develop no-button Velcro closed shirts, which are especially useful for people who have a hand disability, but in our ever more type A people who are ever rushing, we spend a minute a day buttoning our shirts and unbuttoning them. If you can simply Velcro them open and closed, that's going to save time and probably could be, if well executed, a business idea that could work. How about hospital patient wear? We've all been to a hospital and wear that ugly stuff. Well, why can't they be made more attractive? That might be a great business idea. How about seasonal push carts, like Halloween's coming up? That's the logical extension of a pop-up shop because it requires very little rent. But please, your kids should not be fooled by the apparent simplicity of such businesses. Successfully implementing them is really enhanced by a Stanford brain and Stanford stick-to-itness. It requires product development, pricing, project management, people management, logistics, risk management, tax planning. Those are not for the faint of mind or faint of spirit. Parents of elite colleges might facilitate their discussion with their kids about the wisdom of trying self-employment. Maybe even you and your child could team up, or encourage your child to team up with fellow students, or maybe some of your friends or relatives. Next way in which parents can be invaluable, especially in the career front, is to open doors. At some point, your kid will have picked a tentative career or self-employment direction, even if it's just to narrow to, say, a career requiring both quantitative skills and people skills. At that point, maybe the most important thing that parents can do is to open doors. You got to let your people who are relevant friends and family know that your kid is looking for an internship, a job, or mentoring. For example, you might word something like this. My Janie is finishing her sophomore year at Stanford and is intrigued by the idea of a career in which she'll eventually get to be a leader of a biotech company. She's done well in her science courses and has already become president of Stanford's Biology Majors Club. Might you know someone who might be able to offer her an internship or a job or even just some insider advice? Generally, if you've reached out to 10 people, chances are good that none will have a lead for Janie. But the key is in how you respond. You might try something like this. I understand. Would you mind keeping your ears open? And if you hear of anything, letting me know. And if in a few months Johnny is still looking, would you mind if I phone to follow up? Most or all 10 are going to agree to that. I mean, they're unlikely to beat the bushes, but the odds are decent that within those few months, one or more of them will have something for your child. Should you hire your child? Some parents are in a position to offer their new graduate a better career-launching job than your child could get in the open market. And if that's true, it is okay to hire your child, but treat him or her no better than your other employees. That's going to avoid their being disgruntled and your child feeling that he or she is not earning her keep. You can also be very helpful in preparing your kid for a job interview. If your child lands an interview for an internship or a job, or even just for information, you can help in preparing. For example, help your child develop a 30-second summary of him or herself and the tentative career goal. Here's just an example. While I'm a poetry major at Stanford, I don't expect to make a living at that, but I do enjoy using the written and spoken word and hope to eventually rise to a position of leadership in a good company or nonprofit's communication department or for a quality journalistic publication. I'd welcome any advice you might have. It's also useful for your child to have a few what I call PAR stories ready. PAR is an acronym standing for a problem your child faced, the clever or dogged approach she took in solving it, and the positive result. The best PAR stories are those that would impress that target employer. Each one should be told in less than a minute. I'll give you an example. When I started up the campus libertarian chapter, protesters tried to shut us down. They yelled that libertarianism is insensitive to the poor and to people of color. I tried to remain calm, and I made the case for why libertarian policies ultimately are best for all people. The protests fade, and the organization was allowed to continue. You might help your child also in reminding them how important it is to not just get an internship, but make the most of it. That may seem obvious, but I've seen even some top students fail at that. So it can't hurt for you to remind your kid that your child should treat even an unpaid internship as an audition for a job. I may provide an example here, it may help. I was on a Today Show, and in addition to the director and camera persons, the large studio was this huge place, was filled with two dozen 20 to 22-year-old women. And yeah, they were all women, most of whom were chatting with each other. But one of the women was striding from guest to guest, camera person to director to host. Clearly, she was trying to be helpful to everybody. Well, when my segment was over, I told her that I was impressed with her industriousness. She said, funny you should say that. Our summer internships are just about over, and I was the only of the 23 people to be offered a job after graduation. She got to be a producer. So your child's got to think of their internship as an audition, and alas, it's an audition in which only a small percentage of auditioners get cast. I want to talk just a bit about work-life balance, which is something that's worth having a conversation with your kid about. It's fashionable today to extol work-life balance, but based on the experiences I've had with my 5,500 clients now, one size does not fit all. Some people, whether by temperament or by their need or by their choice, they prioritize work-life balance. They want to leave plenty of time for family and friends and recreation and personal maintenance. Other people, however, feel best about their life when it is utterly out of balance, long work days on projects they believe in. For example, Jonas Salk worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for years in his effort to create a polio vaccine. I would imagine that most Silicon Valley inventions, from Google search to the iPhone, from the cardiac stent to the artificial kidney, were not created by clock watchers waiting for the second hand to reach 5 o'clock. Even many people who know they're never going to create a breakthrough product prefer long hours over work-life balance. One of my clients is a cardiologist, and he chooses to work nights and weekends so he can help more patients promptly. You as a parent can help your child make a conscious choice about work-life balance. There's no right or wrong here, except that it is wrong to reflexively decide on how much work-life balance to have based on the zeitgeist of the era or what some media guru insists is the way. Often a good time to discuss this is in the context of vacation time. Some students, amid Stanford stress at any prestigious college, need to veg out. They need to hang out with friends, go shopping, do yoga, play sports. My own daughter spent some college summers just rejuvenating, and yet she was still able to become Hillary Clinton's researcher. She got into Yale Law School. She clerked for a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judge, and now she's Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Department of Justice. Now I want to talk just a little bit about extracurriculars that yield professional and personal growth. Again, I'm trying to arm you with some knowledge that you may know already, but if you don't, will be helpful to you as your advisor to your college kid. Here's a few examples that you might want to explore with your kid. Might they want to start a club or an activist group? You'll notice I'm going to focus on leadership things here because that's so many jobs require not just be a tech guru, but a tech plus having some communication and leadership skills. So start a club or activist group. Create content for a campus newspaper or a radio station or a website. Be a student member of the faculty senate or the student government. Again, depending on your kid's preference, sprinkling your kid's life with pure de-stressors might also enter the conversation. For example, when I was in graduate school at Berkeley, I attended lots of college basketball games and football games, including, rooting against Stanford. I even joined the campus's intramural bowling league. I need to say a word about drugs. The legalization of marijuana in California, where I gave this talk, has created a second alcohol, or worse. According to the recent meta-evaluation, that is the evaluation of a lot of studies by the National Academy of Sciences, that meta-evaluation evaluated the 100 most rigorous studies of marijuana's effects. Its effects on mental and physical health, and in turn career and personal life, are greater than the weed advocates would have us believe. I believe that largely those advocates have been heavily funded by the big tobacco industry that is now buying up pot-growing land in California and in Canada. I think the last thing the advocates thought they'd be doing, the average advocate thought they'd be supporting big tobacco, but inadvertently I think that's what's going on. Anyway, discussing that topic of marijuana can be difficult. Let's say your child knows you're a user yourself, or because if your child's a user, it could generate a lot of defensiveness. I suggest you show your child that summary of that meta-evaluation. You can just Google meta-evaluation National Academy of Sciences and then just simply ask, what do you think? And then let it go unless you're really worried. Of course, you could have a similar discussion about alcohol or stronger substances. I want to say a little bit about how much education is really needed. Recently, Glassdoor.com reported that 15 leading companies, including Google, Apple, and IBM, no longer require a college degree. And some readers interpreted that as meaning a college degree no longer affords career advantage. I believe that's untrue, especially a Stanford level or Harvard or Berkeley degree. Most of the people who are hired without degrees are rock star techies. And I believe that even their prospects for moving up into management and leadership are going to be restricted without a degree and without the attendant, hopefully, polished thinking, speaking, ethics, and connoisseurship that is the goal, at least, of an undergraduate education. Unless your kid is unusually brilliant or a compelling job seeker or entrepreneur, a Stanford-level bachelor's is likely going to continue to provide substantial career and personal benefit. and I need to say something about all graduate degrees here. The increased number of bachelor's degree holders, combined with the increased employer automation, there's so much automation going on, offshoring and belt tightening, means that graduate degrees for the average college grad is also going to often be of value. Is a coterm, that's what Stanford offers, a coterm. It's a 1 year extra to get you a master's. Is it worth it? As with most things, it depends on whether your kid is carefully going to plan that coterm, that's what they call a coterm, to facilitate employment. Would he or she really like another year in school? And, what has your child's efforts of results of the efforts your child's already made to land a good career-launching job with just a bachelor's degree? And finally, the final thing I stressed with my Stanford parents audience was to remember the lesson in my dad's story, which I'll only briefly tell you. I've had the privilege of being a career and personal coach to 5,500 people, as I said, including some of the most successful people on planet Earth, as well as to some real strugglers. And while intelligence and drive are the number one and number two differentiating factors, number three is that the successful ones are more likely to follow my Holocaust survivor dad's advice. He said, never look back, always take the next step forward. And all of us have had crap happen to us, but as I said, successful people are far more likely to not revisit the past iniquities again and again, but quickly learn some lesson and move forward. And I can leave you with no better advice. I know this was a long video, but I hope it's like 21 minutes. Well, that's about half. Anyway, I hope that it was worth it for you. Thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko.